I never thought I'd end up working as a night watchman at a cemetery, but honestly, the pay was good, and the job seemed easy. My name's Jack, and up until last week, I was unemployed, bored as hell, and with no clue how to get out of the rut my life had become. The cemetery gig showed up as an easy way out, so I took it without thinking twice. Who would turn down a job where all you basically have to do is stay awake at night? The first night was quiet, almost too quiet. I spent most of the time playing games on my phone and watching some stupid videos on YouTube. That kind of silence, you know? The kind that reminds you that you're literally surrounded by the dead. But honestly, I didn't give a damn. Everything changed around 3 a.m. when I heard a car approaching. I looked out the window of the small cabin where I stayed and saw a black sedan pulling up slowly. Nothing unusual, right? Sometimes there are late-night visits, or so they told me, but usually, it's desperate relatives or drunks trying to do something stupid. But this was different. 2 people got out of the car, both dressed in black, and they pulled a coffin out of the trunk. It was heavy, you could tell by the way they struggled to carry it. Now, you might think that sounds weird, and I thought so too. Who the hell buries someone at 3 a.m.? I kept watching as they moved quickly, like they were being chased by something invisible. In minutes, the coffin was already in the ground, and they started covering it with dirt. Everything was quick and silent, like they didn't want anyone to notice. I thought I was imagining things, but that left me feeling uneasy. Still, that night, I decided not to do anything. After all, it wasn't my business. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The routine at the cemetery continued, but I was more alert, watching the surroundings more closely, waiting to see if it would happen again. And, of course, it did. 3 days later, around the same time, another car, this time an SUV, showed up with its lights off. Same pattern, 2 people, a coffin, and an insane rush to bury it. No one mentioned anything about these burials in the cemetery's daily reports. I asked my boss the next morning, trying to hide my discomfort, but the guy just told me that some families prefer discretion. Fine, but something was off there. It wasn't normal, and I knew it. I started investigating on my own. I checked the cemetery records, but there was nothing about burials at those hours. Then I decided to do something that was probably a terrible idea. The next night, I hid behind one of the big trees near where the burials were happening. I wanted to see up close what the hell was going on. When the car showed up again, I could almost feel my heart in my throat. This time, they seemed even more nervous, looking around every second, like they were expecting someone to be watching them. But what really gave me chills was when one of the guys pulled something out of his pocket and tossed it onto the coffin before they started burying it. I couldn't see what it was, but the quick, mechanical movement sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was something dangerous, I could feel it. But I was already in too deep, and there was no turning back. The next night, I decided to follow one of the cars after the burial. When they left the cemetery, I got into my old car and followed them. I kept a safe distance, I didn't want them to notice. They drove around the city for a good 40 minutes before stopping at a house on the outskirts. The place was one of those old, run-down houses, with overgrown grass and broken windows. They got out of the car, no coffin this time, and went inside the house without turning on any lights. I stayed there, sitting in my car, not knowing what to do. My hands were shaking, and for a moment, I thought about just leaving it and forgetting all this, but my damn curiosity wouldn't let me. I waited a few minutes before getting out of the car and approaching the house. The back door was unlocked, and I slipped in without making a sound. The house was pitch black, but I could hear muffled voices coming from the basement. I got closer, and that's when everything made sense. The basement was full of coffins. Some were open, others were stacked up, and the smell. My God, the smell was unbearable. The voices I heard were from them, the same guys who had done the burials at the cemetery. They were talking about a new shipment coming in the next week and how they needed to speed things up before someone started getting suspicious. I got out of there as fast as I could, my stomach churning and my mind racing. Those bastards were dealing in body trafficking. I couldn't sleep that night, and the next day, I handed in my resignation. I didn't say anything, didn't ask any questions, just got the hell out of that place and never looked back.
I've never been the type to scare easily, but when I found that forgotten cemetery, something inside me screamed that I was about to step into some dangerous shit. My name is Sarah, and I'm a cold case investigator. You know, the kind of stuff no one else wants to mess with? I always thought my job was kinda lonely, but that never really bothered me. Until that day. It all started with an old, rusty lead that was almost wiped off the map, a reference to an abandoned cemetery that no one seemed to remember. I was working on a case of a woman who went missing in the 70s, and every file I looked at led me to dead ends. But then, I found this strange note among the papers. An address and a date. Something felt off, but not in a supernatural way. More like the feeling that someone was trying to hide something. And I'm not the type to ignore that kind of thing. When I got to the cemetery, the place was even creepier than I had imagined. It wasn't the typical haunted cemetery you see in horror movies, full of old tombstones and moss everywhere. It was a fenced-off lot, all rusted up, with weeds growing all over the place. Inside, the tombstones were all the same, no names, no dates. Just numbers. I started wondering what the hell was going on there. After a few days of digging through old records, I began to piece things together. Those graves belonged to people who were never supposed to be identified. Victims of secret medical experiments. The kind of shit that makes your stomach turn just thinking about it. It was the 70s, and the government was involved in some seriously fuck-up stuff. Things that were never meant to see the light of day. At least, that's what they thought. I found out that the victims were mostly homeless people, addicts, folks that nobody would miss. They were recruited with promises of food, shelter, and a chance to start over. But in reality, they were taken to this place and used as guinea pigs. Drug tests, experimental surgeries, things that would make anyone question humanity. And when their bodies couldn't take it anymore, they were tossed out like garbage. Buried in that damn cemetery without a name, as if they never existed. As I read through all this, my blood boiled. How could anyone be so cruel? But at the same time, the thought that I was messing with dangerous people didn't leave my mind. People who might still be out there, willing to do anything to keep these stories buried. But I needed to know more. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I went back to the cemetery, this time with a shovel in the trunk. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew the only way to understand all this was to dig, literally. The sky was gray, that kind of weather that makes the air heavy, like something's about to go down. I started digging near one of the numbered graves, feeling every muscle in my body tense, expecting the worst. After a few minutes, I hit something solid. A metal box, the kind used to store important documents. When I opened it, I found medical records. Tests, diagnosis, results, and photos. Photos of the victims before and after them. Procedures. People mutilated, deformed, like they were broken toys of some mad scientist. My stomach churned, but I kept going. I couldn't stop now. At the bottom of the box, I found a list of names. Names of doctors, scientists, and to my surprise, politicians. Powerful people who had done everything to cover their tracks, but were now exposed. It was all there. Proof that they had done things no one should ever do. As I processed all of this, I heard footsteps behind me. I froze, still holding the shovel, not knowing what to do. When I turned around, I saw a man. He didn't look threatening, but his eyes told me he knew exactly what I had just uncovered. He didn't say a word, just looked at me like he was warning me. Then he turned and disappeared into the trees. I went back to my car, the metal box in my hands, not sure if I should keep going with this or just bury it all again. I dumped that shit on the road and never looked into it again.
I never imagined life could get so messed up because of a hole in the ground. I'm David, and I work as a civil engineer in a small town in rural America. Recently, the town decided to expand and build new apartments, and of course, I was there to oversee it all. Everything was going fine until one morning, the construction crew started discovering something weird while digging underground. At first, it was just a bone here and there. Nothing major. But soon, the guys began finding more and more bones and started freaking out. For a moment, I thought it might be an old cemetery, but then things started to get even weirder. The bodies were in a horrible state of decomposition, and the strangest part, there were no identifications, no plaques, nothing to say who these people were. It was like someone had dumped the bodies there and covered everything up haphazardly. This freaked everyone out, but what came next was even more disturbing. When the excavation was halted, the town had to stop the construction. Local authorities stepped in, and soon, the entire town was talking about the mystery cemetery. But what really knocked everyone sideways was the discovery that the bodies weren't recent. They were decades old, and the most chilling part, all the bodies had similar marks, as if someone had done a quick, sloppy job of cleaning up. The police started investigating, and as they dug through old documents and records, the most plausible theory began to take shape. It seemed like someone, a real monster, had used that place as a burial ground to hide their victims. I was horrified to think that a serial killer might have used that spot for their crimes. And worse, we never found any clues about who this bastard could be. The town was in shock. All kinds of rumors started circulating, but the worst part was that even with the investigation, the perpetrator was never found. The construction was halted, and the area around the cemetery was cordoned off. The sense of insecurity hung over the town. Everyone had the feeling that the monster who committed these crimes might still be out there, still free. I continued working in the town, but the thought that a serial killer could have been so close left me unsettled. The construction was never resumed, and the land remained as a constant reminder of what might be buried beneath our feet. To this day, I wonder who that guy was and why he chose our town for his horrific acts. The feeling of not knowing if he's still out there is what haunts me daily. And so, the story of the undocumented cemetery remains unresolved, just a dark stain on our town and a shadow that hangs over what could have been a peaceful place. Subscribe to our channel to continue growing. A new story every day.